So like I said, my goal today is to provide two examples. So I'm going to try to illustrate some different evaluation approaches to try to bridge from Pam and Sandra this morning and then lead us into the breakout sessions and kind of start setting the stage for Francis this afternoon. So I'm going to start by talking about one of the, am I allowed to move the whole way over here? Okay.
You can move wherever you
Okay. The first example we're going to talk about is a project called Math Achievement Common Core. And the way I've organized my slides is I'm going to talk about the program context first and then the project context second. So that kind of feeds into what we were already discussing this morning. This project is a state-level math and science partnership, also referred to as an MSP if you've ever heard those. We have federal level and state level MSPs. This is a state level MSP. They're on a 3-year funding cycle. And all of the MSP projects were required to meet the same goals. Okay, so one of the things you're going to do in your breakout session today is start mapping so that you can try to define your goals. These projects, the goals are already defined for them. The 4 goals are shown here. They needed to increase teacher content knowledge, improve classroom instruction, improve student achievement, and build a sustainable partnership. Not lofty at all, right? So this was the program context. The project itself chose to focus on middle and high school math teachers. And the activities, you're going to have to define activities today. The activities that they chose to focus on were to offer summer content courses that were taught by the local university, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. They had to be faculty. They had to be math faculty teaching the courses. They couldn't be from the education department. So they offered the summer content courses typically in a 1-week segment. And then during the school year, the teachers completed a lesson study. And there's a whole body of literature on lesson study. It's done in a very particular way. So what they did was they teamed up in groups of 2 to 3 within their own school. They would choose a topic that they were going to have to teach in math. They would write a lesson plan or use a lesson plan that they already had. And they would teach that and watch each other. And then they would go back and they would change the lesson plan, revise the lesson plan based on what they learned in that first teaching. And then their partner would teach the revised lesson plan to a different set of students. And they would determine whether or not it became more effective, less effective, and then continue that process the whole way through. They had to conduct at least 1 lesson study during the whole school year. Most of them did 2. And during the school year also they had coaching support. So the district provided a either middle school level or high school level content expert who was an instructional coach for the district, and that person provided support in the classroom. So when they wanted to try something new, they could call on the coach and the coach would go in and support the new instruction so that they could try to feel more confident and try to be more successful with the program. Additional context. This was one of the smaller programs. In the first year, they had 24 teachers participate. In the second year, they had 25 teachers. And in the third summer, they had 46 teachers participate. But that's because, this is where some of that context comes in, as the evaluator, pay attention to why the numbers are changing. They, at the end of the second year, they applied for another round of funding. So they proposed a new project called Math TLC, and it got funded. So they had overlap in that summer. So they offered the courses to the teachers from MAC, and they offered the courses to the teachers from Math TLC. So we had more teachers that year. And then you have to start trying to figure out how do you fetter out for the 2 different evaluations. But that's a whole different story. So program context, project context. Then between this slide and the next slide, we're going to wave the magic wand. We're going to do all of those things that Pam and Sandra were talking about this morning, whether it's a theory of change or whether it's a logic model. And then magically, I went to the wrong slide. You end up, for this program, we ended up at an evaluation matrix that was more like a logic model. And I think there was a question about how do you take the theory of change and decide what the next step is. This is kind of where you ended up. Okay, this is where we ended up at East Maine for this particular project. We went through all of the messy stuff, and then tried to put it into a nice organized, how do we actually do this and when are we doing things? So this is kind of the end in mind. Where are you going to end up in your breakout session today as you work through the messy stuff? Where will you end up, and how can we make that look more implementable, right? So in this case, this is an outcomes-based approach that we selected for this program. Again, a whole body of literature about outcomes-based, and you can find many different examples that uses a lot of different language. We've been talking about what words do you pick to describe different things. That's something you have to negotiate with your client and with your evaluator. For this outcomes-based, we relied on the United Way program manual. It's a great resource. Sometimes we actually encourage our clients to purchase it. It's $20 to $30, and then they have it on hand to refer to also. So from their perspective, from the text that we were using, we wanted to be able to link project activities to anticipated outcomes. Those are Pam's arrows. We wanted to be able to keep the project team focused, which is another thing that came up. We have a client under a different set of funding who we always have to keep focused, okay? He's like, oh, I have elementary teachers who want to participate now. Can we do it? No, not under the guise of the funding that you have. You can do it, but you have to figure out how does that fit into your overall goals, and do we need to revise? So keeping them focused. It also allows us to more clearly try to connect how we are impacting the participants' lives. Okay, I think there's been a lot of discussion about participants, including sometimes parents. How does it improve program services? How can we improve program services? Well, that will come through the feedback loop. So we have this automatic feedback loop when you use an outcomes-based system. Outcomes-based tends to be pretty efficient because you don't look really for a lot of emergence when you're doing this. You're looking somewhat very linear and following more closely to a very prescribed logic model. So speaking of language, for this one we already said they didn't get to pick what their goals were. That was imposed on them by the program. So in this case we use goal. Some projects don't try to reach goals. Some of them want to reach objectives or some other language that is germane to their field. For this we were using goals. Instead of activities, we were using the word objective. Yes, I see a face. Why would you use objective here? Well, because it came from the language that we had to provide from the program office. Okay, we evaluate programs for the Department of Defense also. Very strict on the language that we have to use. So that's one of the things when you're going in to work with your evaluator, make sure that you're all using the same words in the same way so that there isn't confusion. Been there many times. We also had to use indicators. I prefer using outputs, one column, outcomes, other column, outputs, the numbers where we're looking for trends over time, outcomes, I like to call them the fuzzy pieces, the feel-good things, the how are we changing society, the warm and fuzzies for outcomes. For here we used indicators. Data source, we pretty much always use data source. This is your stakeholders. So this afternoon in your afternoon breakout session, we're going to start talking about how do you identify stakeholders, what are their roles within the evaluation and in your program, and what are you going to ask them for? So here in this column, we tried to start connecting, this is the activity, this is the change we're looking for, this is who we're going to ask, if that is actually happening. And then the last column for this example is the data collection methods. Sometimes we'll say data methods. I'm not sure what other terminology. I'm sure all of you have other things that you've had to use over the years. How are you going to collect your data? Are you going to rely strictly on document review? Are you going to create surveys? Are you going to pull surveys from the literature? Are you going to do interviews? Do you have enough money to do interviews? Do you have enough money to do observations? Those are very expensive time sinks in your evaluation. So as you move from this room today out to your breakout sessions, and you start thinking about, am I going to work through a logic model? Am I going to work through a theory of change? Where am I going to end up? Okay? What will be my ultimate evaluation plan, evaluation matrix? So this one, these programs are pretty straightforward. The program teams are small. They're typically one school district working on an effort. And the complexity is more limited. So for that type of situation, we felt that the outcomes-based approach was the most appropriate, and we ended up at a fairly straightforward evaluation matrix for this example. On the other hand, we have another program that we've been evaluating for over 8 years. The program level context is that this is an NSF-funded cyber infrastructure project that began as plant science focused. It had 5 years of initial funding with a 5-year extension. Large funding amount, $50 million in the first 5, $50 million in the second 5. Okay, we're in year 8 right now. The project is in year 8 right now. I didn't help build any of it, much to my chagrin. And the expectation from the program was to create cyber infrastructure for plant science that had these 4 characteristics. They wanted it to be by, for, and of the community. So they wanted the community to be able to give input, especially in the beginning. They wanted it to foster computational thinking in biology. They wanted it to be interdisciplinary because they were trying to bridge between plant scientists and computation and computer science, and nobody talks the same language. So how do we overcome the interdisciplinary piece of it? And then in addition to all of that, they need to be able to reinvent themselves and their capabilities constantly. So they were to be on the bleeding edge of technology from day 1 through day, how many days are in 10 years? Right, 365 and a quarter times 10, so that's the program context of this project that started out with the title of iPlant Collaborative, and then they rebranded, as we see here in 2016. So the project context, once they got the award, what did they decide to do? It was awarded to the University of Arizona in 2008. They got renewal in 2013, and they rebranded from iPlant to Cyverse in 2016. They describe themselves as a dynamic virtual organization that provides all of this. So computational infrastructure to handle large data sets and complex analyses. So lots of workflows, lots of very specific items for very specific scientific projects. They offer data storage, bioinformatics tools, image analyses, cloud services, APIs, and the list goes on and on. Their website actually says, et cetera. So I did not put the et cetera. Their website actually says et cetera. So, because the list could probably go on and on. If you need something, you contact them and ask them if they can do it for you, and they will figure out if they can. This project is multi-site. The current sites, this has changed over the years. The current sites, the University of Arizona is still the lead institution. Texas Advanced Computing Center in Texas. It provides a great deal of support, particularly in the high HPC, high performance computing. And then we have Cold Spring Harbor Labs in New York also participating. And the University of North Carolina, Wilmington switched their role a little bit when they got their refunding, but they are still in there providing some level of support, particularly for students, undergraduate students. So how did we decide to evaluate this? It took a while. And we had some board meetings, of which Pam came on early on, and she sat in on some board meetings. I had an external evaluation board who helped develop the plan early on in the project, and after we tried a few things that didn't work out. And so what we did was we got into the systems literature. And once I got into the system literature, I determined that the human systems dynamics was the most appropriate approach for this because of these bullets. And I'm not going to read the bullets to you, but if you want to take a second to kind of review those. Each of these bullets has a very significant discussion of each of them. So I'm going to leave that for possibly discussion after. If you want to talk to me about it after, I'd be happy to. But I don't want to take the time to get that deep into this theory at this time. So very different from the first example that I showed. So where am I going to land? I don't know where I'm going to land, right? Because we got things like people can do what they want. Humans are allowed to do what they want and make decisions that they're not going to always do what we tell them to do. And we have things like, oh my gosh, outcomes are emergent, so they can't define everything that's going to happen. They're going to do this and they're not sure what's going to happen, so how can I possibly decide what to measure ahead of time until it happens? And system boundaries are open. You know, we're moving fluidly between groups. Different members fill different roles. So very complex situation. So the first step, we decided to use the CDE model within human systems dynamics. And the first thing that we did was, what does this project even look like? So containers, differences, and exchanges. Okay? So in the process of deciding what the program looks like, the first thing we had to do was follow that CDE model. It's a little bit like qualitative analysis. So you're going to break everything down into the smallest possible units that you can. So what we did was we looked at individuals. We started with individual people. And then we started building up from there. So what do the individual people do? What is their role? Where do they fit? Oh, they fit into this group called this. Okay, and then that group fits into this group called this. So approximately every 3 months, we would generate a systems diagram. That's what we call these within our working group. We generate a systems diagram to just try to understand what the project looked like at that time point. So this was one of the time points, probably around 2010, where we were looking at where people are, how the teams, where the containers are. So sorry, I skipped. This is a container. And then what you try to do on the D part is just look at that individual container, and you look for differences. And the way they describe differences is what drives the action in that container. So once you figure out where your containers are and what's driving the action in here, then you try to figure out what the exchanges are, what happens between containers. So that finally gave us a level of understanding of the complexity of the project, where things were happening. A lot of stuff happens on the arrows in here, and most of the time that's where we were collecting most of our data, was at the arrows, at those exchange points. So again, where am I going to land? Because this doesn't neatly fit into a logic model. I can't make a nice, neat table, which was very frustrating. I'm trained as a physicist. I like things to be very neat and organized and efficient. And this was very messy. This was more like being a mom. Okay? So where we landed with the help of my colleagues at our board meetings was more open-ended. There was a question earlier about evaluation questions, and are they open-ended or closed-ended? We ended up at a list of fairly open-ended evaluation questions. And this is kind of what has guided the evaluation of this complex project over the years. And then we tried to figure out if I'm going to measure at those exchange parts, right? We're talking to staff. We interview staff. We survey staff because that helps us develop our systems models. But then on top of that, what other data collection are we going to collect? Okay? Because one of the things that I haven't even mentioned is the user population that is growing because of all of this work that this system is doing. And that's a whole other aspect that we had to try to wrap our heads around. So this looks much different, but it doesn't mean that it is any more there's no wrong, right? There's no wrong to these answers. And I think that that's something that Pam and Sandra were trying to get across also. Everything is very contextual, and you need to try to develop the evaluation plan as most appropriate for your project and your project team. So with that in mind, I had emailed the organizers of this group a little bit, because I was trying to understand includes. What's the context that you are in? So I gave you 2 examples of kind of how we went through, waved the magic wand, and we landed somewhere of how to actually try to do an evaluation for 2 very different types of projects. But where will you land? You are potentially, if you have the funding, and I know not all of you are, you're a pilot project. But and you will be able to define an evaluation plan for your pilot project. But you will eventually, potentially, be embedded in an alliance. So now your complexity has gone up because now it's more than just you. So how is that going to affect your project evaluation? And there will be program evaluation. There will be alliance level evaluation. The alliances, I believe, will have a local backbone. So they'll have some type of structure that will be helping them along. And then the alliances, right, there'll be multiple alliance bubbles, and they will be built on a program backbone. So the complexity from your pilot project right now can potentially, over the next few years, become increased. So I don't think that you need to think about that today as you're working through your theory of change or your logic model. But what we've been trying to emphasize is, where are you going? Where is the end? Okay? But the end might be much, much bigger than where you are right now. And because there were the social questions, that's probably going to take a lot more time, right? So the bigger questions, those bigger outcomes of, where are the students going? If they don't make it to the PhD level, where are they going and what are they doing and how have they been impacted?
And are they being counted?
Yes, they should be being counted. So those are all things that as the complexity increases, then the bigger questions and those big the more warm fuzzy things can start coming out probably. But you will have to start playing ball at some point beyond your project within the way that I've read the program to date.